What is the Fair Use Act and how does it affect content creators as well as companies out there? Well, I'm going to cover that in today's video, so stay tuned and don't go anywhere. Hey, this is Lance McGowan with Essential Oils Me, and whether you're viewing this as a content creator yourself, as somebody who just consumes content, which is awesome too, thank you to all the viewers out there, so you can kind of get a feel for what's going on, or if you're a company and your brand is being represented online with or without your permission, the Fair Use Act is something you definitely want to consider first before taking any action. And so I'm going to cover an overview of that from YouTube's website, which pulls their content from the government website for copyrights, and then also kind of keep things in mind with regards to past precedents and what it means for brands and people and viewers as well.
Hey, this is Lance McGowan, and today we're going to talk about the Fair Use Act and what it means for content creators as well as companies who see stuff on videos and don't like it basically or want to do something about it. All right, so what is fair use exactly? Well, fair use is a legal doctrine that says you can reuse copyright protected material under certain circumstances without getting permission from the copyright owner. And there's some videos here that are going to provide some examples of fair use. Now, I'm going to say that again because that is really important. What fair use allows content creators to do is reuse copyright protected material under certain circumstances without getting permission from the copyright owner. And so what may normally be seen as a copyright infringement is not the case when it is in fair use. And so fair use is a part of the copyright law here. And so here's some examples here. You got Donald Duck meets Glenn Beck in the right wing radio duck. And so what it is this is a remix that combines short excerpts from different sources materials and creates a message about the effects of provocative rhetoric in times of economic crisis, and works that create a new meaning for the source material may be considered fair use. And so there's some other videos down here below as well. You got remixes, you got news reporting, so if something is newsworthy that can also be counted, and also criticisms like commentary. You've probably seen Siskel and Ebert, where they would show movie clips and give their commentary on something. And so there's a lot of copyright material in all of these elements, but under the fair use, it is protected and not a actual copyright infringement when it actually may be seen as a copyright infringement. And so this is actually, I'm going to include the link to this because this is from YouTube actually, and so this is really important to keep in mind here. All right, as I scroll down, we're just going to cover some of the fair use guidelines. All right, so let me minimize this here. So different countries have different rules about when it's okay to use material without copyright owner's permission. For example, in the United States, works of commentary, criticism, research, teaching, or news reporting might be considered fair use. Some other countries have a similar idea called fair dealing that may work differently. Courts analyze potential fair uses according to the facts of each specific case. You'll probably want to get legal advice from an expert before uploading videos that contain copyrighted protected material. So that is kind of a good rule of thumb to do as a content creator. And then as a company looking at these videos, it's important to kind of think about the 4 factors of fair use. And so this is what actually courts encourage companies to do so that they, don't kind of come to the wrong conclusion or an inaccurate conclusion. And that's exactly what it states right here. And this is again on YouTube's page here, and they say in the United States, fair use is determined by a judge who analyzes how each of the 4 factors of fair use applies to a specific case. So everything's on a case-by-case basis. And number 1, the purpose and character of the use, including whether such use is of commercial nature or is for nonprofit educational purposes. Now, I do a lot of education on my website. I use a number of different material that is trademarked or copyrighted or protected, but either I got permission or it's for educational purposes. And so for me, that's something to keep in mind. But when we look at some of this more fine print, it says courts typically focus on whether the use is transformative, that is, whether it adds new expression or meaning to the original, or whether it merely copies from the original. Commercial uses are less likely to be considered fair, though it's possible to monetize a video and still take advantage of the fair use defense. So fair use is, according to YouTube, a defense, right? It's something that has been established by the government to protect people with regards to offer, like I said, educational purposes. And this is definitely important to think about here. And how you define commercial is different, because if you see an ad play before a video, that's different, right? You don't have too much control over what ads played. I mean, different content or different ad categories maybe, but with regards to the actual content in like a video, this is going to be really important to think about. The next number two here is the nature of the copyrighted work. So using material from primarily factual works is more likely to be fair than using purely fictional works. And so this is going to also be important as well. And for me, it's always important to kind of stick to the facts and keep it fact based. I do offer opinion on top of facts. That's where the commentary comes in. But that is what to think about. And then kind of going back up to the commercial part here, it's important to also remember what commercial means. Does that mean like, hey, buy now, you can get this here, or here's a link, or, so that's where kind of the interpretation of this can come in, is like what equals, commercial. Is commercial where you mention a price and give a link to buy, or you go to a shop page, or is it just if you're educating people on benefits and uses, is that considered commercial, even though you may or may not be a part of that company as an affiliate or as an employee, or as a independent contractor? So that's where some of this interpretation comes in, and where it gets a little bit gray, right? But I go back to the black and white of what they said. Like, if it's for educational purposes, then, and educational for me is always understanding benefits and uses as it relates to a product or service. All right, so number three is the amount and substantiality of the portion used in relation to the copyrighted work as a whole. So borrowing small bits of material from an original work is more likely to be considered fair use than borrowing large portions. However, even a small taking may weigh against fair use in some situations if it constitutes the heart of the work. And so again, this is going to be up for interpretation a little bit as well, but whether that's, I mean, big things to keep in mind are like music, movies. Those are the big things that YouTube automatically runs their algorithm through when a video is uploaded. Now, if it's for like a picture, or mentioning of words of a brand or of a product or something like that, I mean, you really have to think about this, because there are so many Netflix documentaries, there's so many movies that have restaurants in the background, or people will wear like different clothes with brands on it and stuff like that, and it's like it'd be really difficult to like go after everyone that ever used the logo. I mean, at some point it's almost like free advertising, especially if it's like in a movie or something. And if you don't pay for it. Now, there's some companies that will actually pay to have their brand in a movie. I know Transformers does that with like GM and stuff like that. And it's like, it's okay to show our cars, or okay to show other stuff, because we pay to be there. But at the end of the day, I'm not in a movie yet. But anyways, okay, number four here is the effect of the use upon the potential market for or value of the copyrighted work. So uses that harm the copyright owner's ability to profit from his or her original work are less likely to be fair uses. Courts have sometimes made an exception under this factor in cases involving parodies. So as you know, when you parodies are just making fun of people. I know there's a lot of like parodies on like music videos and even movies, and there's movies that come out that make fun of other movies, and so, but they use the image and likeness of that other movie or a brand or even other, and some of them even just put the logos and everything straight up in that parody. And so it does, and so it's like this is kind of saying, did that negatively harm the market for that? And for me, as an educator, if I'm educating on benefits and uses, that only helps the market and helps that. And so that, depending on what brand I choose. But for me, like, I always just try to choose brands that I believe in and that I believe add value from a health and wellness standpoint. And so that for me is something I always keep in mind. Now, these are definitely some big rule of thumbs here. These are the four factors of fair use, and this is what the court actually wants people to look at, companies and individuals, before they actually do anything. So myth one, if I give credit to the copyright owner, my use is automatically fair use. Well, Unless it's transformative, it says here, it's usually a key in the fair use analysis. Giving credit to the owner of a copyrighted work won't by itself turn a non transformative copy of their material into fair use. Phrases such as all rights to go to the author and I do not own do not automatically mean you are making fair use of the material, nor do they mean you have the copyright owner's permission. Kind of going back up here, it says there is some misinformation out there that might lead you to believe fair use automatically applies if you say a few magic words. There's actually no silver bullet that will guarantee you are protected by fair use when you use copyrighted material you don't own. Courts will consider all four of the factors described above and weigh them on a case by case basis. Here's some common myths. So that's why it's so important for companies, if they see material out there that they believe is copyright infringement, to run through these four factors first. And like I said, there is going to be some interpretation, and ultimately the court will determine whether or not it's really good. But in general, like if it's educational or newsworthy, like it is fair use. like and that's going to be kind of hard to obviously determine on the front end, but I'm going to keep going here because these are some good myths. Myth number two: if I post a disclaimer on my video, my use is fair use. It says, as we mentioned above, there's no magic words that will do this for you. Posting the four factors of fair use in your video or including the phrase no infringement intended won't automatically protect you from a claim of copyright infringement. Yes, that's a good point. Myth number three: entertainment or nonprofit uses are automatically fair use. Okay, so here we go. Courts will look carefully at the purpose of your use in evaluating whether it is fair, but the three remaining factors also need to be considered. So it's not just one of those factors, it's all four. Declaring your upload to be for entertainment purposes only, for example, is unlikely to tip the scales in the fair use balancing test. Similarly, nonprofit uses are favored in the fair use analysis, but it's not an automatic defense by itself. So basically, like they said, there's no silver bullets to make something fair use, but when you consider all four factors, that'll help determine whether it is or not. And just mentioning words on a video is not going to automatically make something. Number four is if I add any original material I created to someone else's copyrighted work, my use is fair use. Even if you added a little something of your own to someone else's content, you might not be able to take advantage of the fair use defense, particularly if your creation fails to add new expression, meaning, or message to the original. As with all the other cases discussed here, courts will consider all four factors of fair use test, including the quantity of the original use. And so when I think about that, that's what logo was used, any products in there, the mentioning of the company's name, and what was actually created. Like I do a lot of PowerPoints, which is me creating everything, but using obviously content from other sources and pictures from other sources, but me doing a lot of creation. And so I don't know what percent needs to be transformative, if it's 80% of the screen or 80% of the time, and that whole like percent thing can get kind of technical. But again, there's no guarantees here that something's fair use. So I like how YouTube is still being kind of balanced, but at the same time they're like, hey, there are some criteria at which to look at to make sure you're not overthinking something's copyright infringement. So just because so they're kind of like saying it's not automatically copyright infringement, but it's not automatically fair use. There's like that's like the two main things to think about. So YouTube's fair use protection. So we're gonna go back to this a little bit. There's a number of like videos that basically were trying to get taken down because the companies that were involved believe that there was some infringement involved or copyright infringement. But YouTube does protect some of these video owners and people based on the content they're creating because they're just educating people. Like I know I watched a Netflix documentary on natural gas fracking, and I was like, wow, that's a lot of toxic chemicals they put into the ground and gets into our waters and lakes and stuff. But yeah, so there's obviously some more examples of how it may seem like there. Okay, so here it says here the video by the Young Turks, which shows brief clips from a heavily criticized commercial as a part of a conversation on why it offends viewers. And so it says here, while we can't offer legal defense to everyone, we remain vigilant about takedown notices impacting all creators. You may have seen press coverage on cases where we've asked the rights owners to reconsider takedowns or reinstated fair use videos. So YouTube will kind of swing the pendulum both ways depending on what it is. And there's, just a number of other examples here where there's commentary or criticism being in there, or remixes, or like parodies, or a lot of other stuff. And so yeah, like it really just goes back to those four factors on whether something is fair use or not. And then obviously there's some more resources here with regards to the Center for Media and Social Impact. There's the Digital Media Law, and there's the U.S. Copyright Office Fair Use Index. And so these are referred to for educational purposes only and are not endorsed by YouTube, right? That just by stating that doesn't mean it's not fair use or is fair use. Anyways, back to their rule, or the rule of the rule. Okay, so this kind of just is a summary and of the Fair Use Act and really what it means for content creators. And I wanted to do this video because, I see, like, and specifically, like, I got a cease and desist letter from a company about using their brand. And for me, it's important to, number one, understand, what rights I have, because when you look at the First Amendment, I have that from Cornell. And they basically say, it guarantees freedom of expression by prohibiting Congress from restricting the press or the rights of individuals to speak freely, right? And so it's important for us to, as content creators, be able to speak freely and not be censored. But at the same time, it's important for companies to, have their brand protected. And so there's a lot of collaborations that also happen, though. Like that same brand, you know, has events that go on that use multiple other different brands, right? And so did they get with their compliance officer for all those brands that are used, for the trucks that are used, for the bikes that are used, for all these other things? Like there's so many other things. And so it's just, I feel like it's more just about building relationships with companies and people, and and really just understanding the intent and purpose behind stuff. And this is the copyright.gov, law here that kind of goes over all the Fair Use Act as well that YouTube was covering. And then there's also a documentary on Netflix. Let me reload it here. It's called Nobody Speak: Trials of the Free Press. And so this was basically a documentary that talked about Hulk Hogan's court case against Gawker Media, and sheds light on the wealthy, powerful figures who challenge freedom of the press in order to silence critics. And so that was really interesting documentary about free press and how that's affected by court cases and stuff. And one thing that was interesting that came out of this was that the actual judge for one of the lawsuits that they have threw out the case because what Gawker was doing was newsworthy. Now Gawker is just like all about like presenting information in a very they cover news that other news agencies don't cover. So they're a little more like provocative, if you want to call it that. So I could see how somebody could take offense to it, but there was some other hidden agendas in there with all the other stuff. So we're not even going to get into all that. You can probably watch this trailer here to get an idea, or watch it on Netflix to just kind of get an idea of how freedom of press and lawyers and people are affected with regards to newsworthy content.
On one end of the spectrum, you have fair use. On the other end of the spectrum, you have copyright infringement. And what connects or makes either one above the other depends on a number of different factors. And there's four of them that were listed in today's video. But it's so important, whether you're a company, whether you're a content creator on whatever platform, or you're just a viewer, it's so important to kind of understand how that whole process works, because there's a lot of like laws that support either side, but then there's things that people could do that would infringe upon or step over that. And so I always say like the first step in kind of this whole process is just understanding what rights you do have as an individual, as a company, and then also seeking some type of legal advice so you can get a better feel of what's going on, and let them know about obviously the links I'll have in the description, but also your intent and what's going on. And ultimately at the end of the day, a court of law will be able to give the final ruling, but it's so important to try to focus on resolution and really developing, not having to settle or to have to win or lose a case. It's just trying to work with somebody or a brand or a company so that you can come to a mutual, decision that benefits both, and whether that's fair use or copyright infringement. I think the key concept is to understand intent, to understand, those four factors that were mentioned in the video, And then number three is to try to work with somebody to develop a mutually agreed upon solution. And that will be the keys. And then going from there will make more sense. Well, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to click the subscribe button so you can catch more video updates, or click one of the links in the description box below to continue to get your learn on.